is a lot of talk about neglect of the stadium. There is no talk of neglect of the neighborhood that they are about to destroy. This is offensive.
You couldn't be more wrong if you tried. Welcome on in, and today we're talking about the Nashville Fairground Speedway in Nashville, Tennessee. A lot of headlines have been made over the last few, months, and particularly this week with this video clip that made its rounds this week. Now, what exactly is going on with the Speedway, and why are local residents so wrong in so many ways? And what can be done to help improve not only the Speedway, but the noise for the residents and the city of Nashville and NASCAR as a whole? Well, honestly, the plans that have been laid out. Before we get into what's happening in 2020 with the track and plans for the future, let's talk about how the track started. Ground broke way back in 1904 on what was initially a dirt track. That's right, horseless carriage races is what it was called, and motorcycle racing started back on June 11, 1904. People marveled at cars traveling at over 60 miles an hour on the dirt track, and things more or less picked up and was going pretty well for many years, many decades actually. Then in 1957, someone had a bold idea to pave the track. So in 1958, the track that we know today opened in its current configuration as a paved half-mile with a quarter-mile track on the front stretch using the same front straightaway. Then, in 1959, the NASCAR Grand National Series, known as the Cup Series today, raced 200 laps on the half-mile. Cup races were held for years at the Speedway, and the last Cup race was held there back in 1984. Now, since the mid-80s, the track has actually held races very often, I might add. And yes, it is a historic landmark, meaning that the Nashville Fairground Speedway is not going anywhere. When the track was built over 100 years ago, the city wasn't exactly booming, let's just say. It was just starting out. The neighborhoods surrounding it weren't there, and the track, more or less, was in the middle of nowhere. Now, in the 100 years since, obviously things have changed, and yes, a neighborhood has sprung up around the track. Now, local residents are upset because, frankly, it's loud. But, to be frank, you moved close to a racetrack. What did you think was going to happen at that racetrack? Now, fast forward to this week, more specifically May 11th, 2021. Nashville's Board of Fairs Commission raised concerns during their monthly meeting on Tuesday night. More specifically, they wanted more details on Bristol Motor Speedway's plans to renovate the historic Fairground Speedway. It was a 4-hour session that included more than 75 minutes of public comments. Questions range from sound and traffic worries for local residents to cost and benefits of having NASCAR's premier series predominantly return to the track for the first time since 1984. Speedway Motorsports through the Bristol Motor Speedway is working on a deal with the city of Nashville to lease, manage, and operate Fairground Speedway, and as part of the deal, Speedway Motorsports would pay $1 million a year to assume financial responsibility for renovations and maintenance of the track. It's subject to approval of the Board of Fairs Commission and also the Metropolitan Council. Speedway Motorsports signed a letter of intent with the city to finalize the agreement before July 31st. Local Nashville residents have a lot of concerns about this, more specifically the sound. They don't want more sound coming to their area, keeping them up late at night and ruining their afternoon. Listen to some of these negative Nancys who more or less echo and parrot their own discussions, and who are incredibly misinformed and don't understand the full situation.
I'm already experiencing the nightmare that is about to unfold as a result of the noise that the racetrack produces. I have tried turning my television up to volume 10 and my sound system at the same time. When NASCAR runs, my windows vibrate. It scares my dog, and I simply cannot have an evening to myself in my apartment. There are 5 perfectly operating Formula One and NASCAR tracks that are fully operational, that are available 20 to 30 minutes outside Nashville. There is no other city in the United States that has a NASCAR track or a Formula One track in a residential neighborhood. There is a lot of talk about neglect of the stadium. There is no talk of neglect of the neighborhood that they are about to destroy. This is offensive. This is a neighborhood that we were able to buy into quite easily that is now raising in prices. We are enjoying the property gains, which we do not want to lose. This is a terrible, terrible decision, and none of it should be allowed to be processed and to go through. I'm appalled that this should even be a discussion and that any of this should be even contemplated within the residential neighborhood that we live.
Air pollution is a big concern of mine. My mother suffers from many respiratory conditions. I certainly wouldn't want that.
Do any of you on the board or the mayor live in our neighborhood? And you think this is a good thing? No? If this wanted to move to your neighborhood with NASCAR, not Speedway, but with NASCAR, would you guys be like, come on, yeah? That's what I thought. Thank you.
All right, a couple of valid points, but a lot of misinformation and inaccuracies in their statements. And to be frank, I know exactly where they're coming from. Yes, I'm a huge racing fan and a reporter, true, so I'm a little biased, but I also live very close to a racetrack. For 2 years, I lived within 5 miles of Auto Club Raceway in Pomona, California. And yes, I'm a drag racing fan, but I gotta tell you, being woken up at 7 in the morning on Saturdays by loud engines going every 3 minutes or so was fairly annoying. And I'm not complaining, I'm really not, I'm just saying I understand where they're coming from. It is disruptive. You have to sympathize with the residents of Nashville because they do bring up an excellent point. But it wasn't just the naysayers that showed up to the city council meeting. There was a few local residents that showed up, including one very prominent one.
I live in Franklin, Tennessee, 37069. Anyway, I've been coming down here a long time, and there's a couple of things that kind of stick out. First of all, Jerry Caldwell, Bruton Smith, Marcus, the SMI group, they don't come any better than that. If they tell you they're going to do something, you can take it to the bank. Bruton Smith has been in this sport longer than I have, and he loves this sport, and he's a promoter of the fans. He loves to do things that the fans like. If you look at, they said you couldn't light a super speedway, and they were the first ones to light Charlotte Motor Speedway. They said no condos at a racetrack. They were the first ones to build condos at the racetrack. So these people they're visionaries. They do things to the speedways, they do things to the facilities, they do things in the community. Speedway Children's Charity is a great example of their involvement in the community. So when Jerry sits up here, and I am impressed with the amount of work they have done over the last couple of years, putting together the research, the programs, all the things that they've presented here tonight. Very impressive.
The soccer's coming. It's got 30 dates plus. Why don't our racetrack have 30 dates plus? I mean, why? We have had it. We have been there. Give us our dates. I like Bristol. I hope they come because I think it's the only savior for the racetrack. With the fair board members and the city the way they are right now, I think it's the only savior for it. I don't like the restrictions of 10 races, no concerts. Hey, we used to have the country music, fanfare out there. How many concerts do we have then? What's wrong with y'all guys? Do y'all want to kill this racetrack? Is that what you're wanting to do? I'm just asking a question because that's what way you're operating right now and the decisions you're making, you're killing this place. And you know it. Is it your agenda? I mean, if it ain't, then approve the deal. Let the people have some dates, let them make some money, and let the city make some money. But instead, we're going to sit here and talk about other things. Let's talk about the racetrack, what we're here tonight to talk about. Let Bristol have the deal. Let them do it. Let the city make money. Give them more dates. Give them more concert dates. Why are you handicapped? soccer stadium is going to be real noisy for 30-plus dates. And y'all hadn't even addressed putting a sound wall around them. But please, I'm asking you to do the deal.
The racetrack was there before everything was built. They built everything around the racetrack. Then they wanted to start hollering about it. Now, I go to the races. Yes, I'm an avid race fan. People work every week to go to baseball, football. I work to go to the races. I love racing. I love everything at the fairgrounds. So SMI and Nashville, the city of Nashville, needs to keep the racetrack and everything else there.
There's both negative and positive support for the Speedway, but the thing that the Nashville residents need to understand is that the racetrack isn't going anywhere. Right now, the racetrack is open 7 days a week with no active curfew, and it can be leased or raced on 365 days a year, meaning there is no restrictions on when race cars are on the track making noise. What the Bristol Motor Speedway and Speedway Motorsports intends to do is come in, put up a sound barrier around the track to help mitigate that, and more specifically, they are going to have less track time available for cars, meaning there's going to be actually less racing on the track with a sound wall to help mitigate that sound. Now, the people who showed up to the meeting this week were fighting the wrong fight. The fight isn't close the Speedway. The Speedway is not closing or going anywhere. The fight should be approve these changes to the Speedway so that our neighborhood isn't interrupted by racing constantly. Right now, that racetrack, in theory, could see over 300 race dates, in theory. With the new plan, there will be a curfew installed, sound barrier installed, and less time on track, meaning the neighborhood would get better almost instantly. And when cars are on track, the sound wall would greatly help disperse the sound of the cars and of the racing. Plus, it would take a historic track and actually renovate it and bring it up to 21st century technology standards, safer barriers, new media center, new grandstands, better parking structures, and actually bring NASCAR back to the track. Now, it's more than likely a cup race won't appear at the track overnight. More than likely, NASCAR would try and test the waters out with a truck and Xfinity race before eventually bringing a cup date to the track. And yes, in 2021, the NASCAR Cup Series will return to the Nashville Super Speedway for the first time in many years, and it appears that the city is actually using the Nashville date at the Super Speedway to see how much viability there is to actually enact this plan, which might actually be the wrong move, because the Nashville Super Speedway is far outside the city limits, and racing at the Nashville Super Speedway hasn't been great for years. I'm not saying the Cup Series returning to the Nashville Super Speedway is a bad move. I'm saying they're going to the wrong track in Nashville. The general manager of the Bristol Motor Speedway, Jerry Caldwell, gave a presentation Tuesday and took questions from the commission throughout the evening. And yes, there are a lot of questions still to be answered. But some of the bullet points for the plan is that the deal with the city is for 10 years with 4 5-year renewal options, making it essentially a 30-year lease of the track. A curfew of 10 p.m. for racing events and 11 p.m. for NASCAR events would be implemented. One of the biggest concerns is sound and how it would be mitigated. Caldwell shared conceptual renderings that had a 20-foot wall stretching from the middle of turns 1 all the way down the back straightaway and through the middle of turn 3 on the half-mile speedway. Essentially, a gigantic sound wall keeping everything in, with the grandstands on the front straightaway acting as a sound wall on the front straightaway, therefore encompassing the entire speedway in soundproofing materials. The conceptual renderings also showed a tunnel underneath turn 3 that would be added, and a new main grandstand on the front straightaway that stretched into turn 1. And I know it's low-hanging fruit to make fun of this woman who, frankly, is spouting lies to help further her own agenda, but she does bring up excellent points, and although she is incredibly wrong on most of those points, you have to understand where she's coming from. She wants to be left alone in her apartment. And that's fine. She wants peace and quiet. Don't we all want that in our neighborhoods? I know I certainly do. Putting up this sound barrier and allowing Speedway Motorsports to make these changes to the Nashville Fairground Speedway is a step in that direction. The track is going nowhere. It'll be here probably for another 100, if not 200 or 300 years. So the residents of Nashville need to accept that. And frankly, they need to accept help when it's handed to them. That's exactly what Speedway Motorsports is doing. no other organization or even the city is willing to step in and put up that sound barrier and renovate that speedway. Not just the sound barrier, but all the other accommodations in the area, and there is no regulations right now on when cars can or cannot run on that track. In theory, cars could be running well into the wee hours of the morning, and no one wants to see that. I've heard arguments from local residents that students are in the area and they don't want schools to be impacted by this. Races would only take place on the weekend, and frankly, schools aren't in session on the weekend. If you don't understand that, maybe you should be going back to school instead of your kids. And I understand, they're grasping at anything and throwing spaghetti at the walls and seeing what sticks to try to get the speedway closed. But that fight will never happen. The speedway will stay open. And I truly think that Speedway Motorsports is the only way to help these residents. They just can't accept it because they want the speedway closed, and that will not happen. The speedway has been in that neighborhood for over 100 years, just like many other racetracks that have been in neighborhoods for years. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway, one of the most famous speedways in the world, is in the middle of a neighborhood. And guess what? No problems there. Local residents knew that when they bought into that area, that there was a racetrack right next door that would be running on weekends. Heck, the residents of Indy actually embrace the culture and love the track. And yeah, they love the fact that they have a racetrack right next door to them. And why wouldn't they? If you're a race fan, it's absolutely amazing. And if you're not, well, maybe you shouldn't have bought a house or an apartment right next door to a racetrack. Now, as for the speedway itself, I do think that a cup race is deserving of this racetrack. I don't think Nashville Super Speedway is a good idea for the Cup Series. I think that the Fairgrounds is the perfect racetrack for it. And someone else online threw this idea out there, and yeah, I'm going to echo it as well. Move the All-Star race to the Nashville Fairground Speedway. That's right. But don't do it in the middle of the season like we have now with the Texas and before that Bristol. Do it at the end of the season. More specifically, do it during championships week. That's right. I saw this idea online. I absolutely endorse this idea and support it and want to help encourage it. Imagine this. It's a few weeks after Thanksgiving. Chase Elliott just won the championship out in Phoenix, and you're already starting to miss NASCAR racing, thinking, how am I going to get through the next 2 months without racing? And it's early December, you're starting to gear it for the holidays, and guess what? You have the championship banquet in Nashville on a Saturday morning. And then, Saturday night, we go all-star racing out at the Nashville Fairground Speedway. Sounds pretty cool, right? It's an exhibition race. It's absolutely, let's just have fun. No points on the line, no nothing. Let's just have a really good time. Now, doesn't that sound a lot more fun than doing the all-star race in the middle of the season? And yes, I've already harped on the all-star race and why it needs to end, and I think I need to accept the all-star race isn't going anywhere. So instead, I want to see the all-star race move to a historic track in a great town that already has ties to championship week. Let's move that all-star race into the winter months, in the off-season, and actually have fun. That way it allows teams to elect to race it or not. Some of the smaller teams who, frankly, are struggling to get to the racetrack as it is, can sit this one out and, frankly, save their money and save their equipment for the upcoming season. And the bigger teams that can afford to basically throw money at anything can head on down there and really go wild. Go experiment with some new setups, new crew members, and really have some fun at the Nashville Fairground Speedway and go all out for the All-Star race in the middle of the winter. I'm just saying it would be extraordinarily cool. But I'll go ahead and pass this on to you. Despite the fact that there's low-hanging fruit with the residents and a lot of memeable things that they said, what do you think about the Speedway? Do you think that the sound barrier is the solution? Do you think that this is a great idea for NASCAR? And do you think the idea of the All-Star race moving to Nashville for championship week is a good one? Or would you just rather see a date or two return to the Nashville Fairground Speedway? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're there, give us a thumbs up on this video and mash that subscribe button. I'm Alan Bailey in Nashville. Hopefully very soon, we'll see ya at the track.